All right, so today we're going to really get our hands dirty, diving deep into a company I'm sure everyone's familiar with. We're talking Nongfu Spring, a brand that's, well, kind of unavoidable if you've ever been anywhere near a beverage aisle, at least here in China.
That's for sure. And to really get to the bottom of what's going on with them, we're going to be spending our time with their 2023 annual report.
Exactly. Think of this less as a news report and more like we're putting on our analyst hats, pulling apart what they themselves have shared to see how things are actually going.
Right. Our goal here is to figure out what's really driving their business, how their finances are looking, and what their plans for the future are, all based on what they're telling us.
hmm
And maybe even a little bit of what they aren't saying, reading between the lines.
I like that. A little bit of detective work. Okay, so let's map this out a bit. We're going to start by taking a look at how each of their different businesses are doing. They've got their bottled water, of course, but they're also big into tea these days,
Yeah.
and even have some other beverage lines we'll dig into.
Right. And then after that, we got to get into the numbers. We'll be looking at their key financial figures, not just what they are, but trying to understand why they are what they are. What's really moved the needle for them?
And since no business exists in a vacuum, we'll also be checking out how they're trying to create value for their shareholders. Dividends, share buybacks, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. It's about the big picture.
Hmm.
And then finally, we'll try to put it all together, get a sense of where this business might be headed. Sound like a plan?
Perfect plan. Let's jump right in then. So kicking things off with Nongfu Spring's bread and butter, their packaged drinking water, still the biggest chunk of their revenue, pulling in 20,262 million RMB in 2023.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant number, right? Up 10.9% from the 18,263 million RMB they made in 2022. Not too shabby.
So solid growth for sure, but when you look at the proportion of their total revenue, things get a little more interesting because it actually dropped a bit. Went from almost 55% in 2022 to just over 47% in 2023.
Ah, that's a really good catch. It means some other parts of their business must be growing even faster, right?
You got it. And the real standout, their tea beverages. Talk about a growth spurt. They went from 6,906 million RMB in 2022 all the way up to 12,659 million RMB in 2023. That's huge.
Wow, that's a massive jump, almost doubled. Tea beverages are now bringing in nearly 30% of their total revenue compared to just under 21% the year before.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because this kind of rapid growth in a major segment like that can really start to change the whole shape of a company.
Absolutely. Makes you wonder what their long-term strategy is there. Okay, so we got water and tea booming. What about their other beverages? What are we seeing there?
Well, they're functional beverages, things like sports drinks and energy drinks. They were a bit more, well, stable. Brought in 4,902 million RMB in both 2023 and 2022. Pretty much consistently at around 11.5% of their total revenue.
Huh. So that's interesting. Makes you wonder, right? Is this a deliberate choice? Maybe they're focusing their growth efforts elsewhere? Or could it be that they're facing tougher competition in that space?
Yeah, it's something to keep an eye on for sure. Moving on to their juice beverages, we see a little more positive movement. They made 3,533 million RMB in 2023, up from 2,879 million the year before.
So another area with some growth, but kind of like what we saw with packaged water, even though revenue went up, its percentage of the total actually dipped a bit, went from 8.7% to 8.3%.
Right, so slight downward trend there. And then there's the catch-all other products category. This is where they lump in their soda water, sparkling flavored drinks, even some fruit and coffee products.
Oh, right. Kind of like the miscellaneous section.
Yeah.
So what's happening with that? Any big surprises?
Not really. Actually, this segment saw a small decline, drop from 1,353 million RMB in 2022 to 1,311 million in 2023. Went from 4.1% of total revenue down to 3%.
Huh. So looking at all this, it seems pretty clear their main focus and where they're seeing the most action is definitely on their water, and especially their tea.
Exactly. That's the story the numbers are telling for sure. Okay, so we've gotten a feel for their different product lines, but I think it's worth zooming in a little bit on that packaged drinking water, their flagship product. One thing that really jumps out from the report is how much emphasis they put on their water sources.
Oh, yeah. You can't miss that.
Hmm?
They're really playing up where their water comes from. They specifically call out 4 places: Changbai Mountain, Imai Mountain, Taihang Mountain, and Thousand Island Lake.
And they don't just name them. They go into detail about the environment, the local plants and animals. They even talk about the climate and water cycles of these areas. It feels very deliberate.
It's all about branding, right?
Mm.
Creating this image of purity and natural goodness. They're really trying to differentiate themselves from the competition and connect with consumers on a deeper level.
Yeah, it's definitely not just about quenching thirst. They're really pushing this idea of what kind of water nurtures what kind of life. It's a smart way to give bottled water, which seems like such a basic product, kind of premium feel.
Oh, for sure. They're really leaning into that connection with nature.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just words, right? They've got these seeking the source activities, inviting people to actually visit these water sources, see them for themselves. It's experiential marketing at its best.
Yeah, really smart. Builds trust and reinforces that message that every drop of Nongfu Spring has a beautiful source. And this whole focus on transparency and connection with consumers, it seems to be reflected in how they're investing in their internal systems as well.
Oh, you mean those information system upgrades they talked about for 2023?
Exactly. It sounds like they're really trying to streamline and improve their operations, especially when it comes to marketing and connecting with their partners.
Yeah, they're talking about upgrading their whole marketing system to create a more seamless integration with their distribution partners. The goal seems to be a single system, for data, technology, and all that.
It sounds incredibly ambitious. Refining their tech infrastructure, setting up data analysis tools, consumer marketing platforms, even working on smart algorithms for their retail channels. They're clearly aiming for some pretty big improvements in efficiency and how they operate overall.
Absolutely. Makes you wonder how much they're spending on all of this, though, and how long it'll take to really see the results.
Good point. It's always about balancing investment with return, right? Okay, so lots of exciting developments, but it's not all sunshine and roses. They also point out some challenges in the report. One thing that stuck out was the increasing regulatory scrutiny in the food and beverage industry.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They specifically mentioned updates to the food safety standard management measures in 2023. And remember that big national standard for beverages they introduced in 2022? That's going to be a factor, too.
Right, GB 7101 2022. It's a whole new ballgame for the industry. With all these regulations getting stricter, companies are going to have to step up their game when it comes to quality control and production.
No doubt about it. It's going to be a continuous investment and probably a bit of a headache to keep up with all the changes. But hey, it could also be an advantage for a company like Nongfu Spring.
How so?
Well, they already have a pretty strong reputation for quality, and with all these new regulations, it could create a barrier to entry for smaller players who might struggle to meet the standards. Makes it harder for them to compete.
That's a good point. It's all about turning challenges into opportunities, right? Another thing they highlighted was the growing consumer awareness about food safety and healthy eating.
Right? People are paying more attention to what they're putting in their bodies. It's definitely a trend that's here to stay.
And for Nongfu Spring, with their whole brand built around natural and healthy, this could actually be a big plus, right?
Totally. It aligns perfectly with their existing image. But it also means they can't afford to get complacent. They need to keep innovating and make sure their products really do live up to those health-conscious expectations.
Exactly. Consumers are getting smarter and more demanding. And speaking of demands, the report also mentioned stricter oversight when it comes to actual food sales. Making sure what's on the shelves is up to par.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. With all the focus on food safety these days, they're going to be cracking down on everyone in the supply chain, making sure things are handled properly right up to the point of sale.
And this could play to Nongfu Spring's strengths, don't you think? They already have such a wide and well-established distribution network.
For sure. Having that control over their supply chain and their sales channels is going to be more important than ever. It means they can guarantee the quality and safety of their products all the way to the consumer, builds trust, and protects their reputation.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on the business side. Now, let's turn our attention to the money, shall we? We gotta look at those key financial figures for 2023.
Time for some number crunching. You ready?
Bring it on. So we already mentioned their impressive revenue jump. Now, the big question is, what was really driving this growth? What were the key factors?
Well, the two obvious ones are the strong performance of their tea beverages, which we've talked about, and the continued growth in their packaged water sales. Those two together are clearly pulling a lot of weight.
All right, the dynamic duo. But we can't forget the broader context, right? The Chinese economy has been recovering from the pandemic, and that means people are spending more. That's definitely playing a role, too.
For sure. Consumer confidence is a huge factor. Plus, all those investments Nongfu Spring made in expanding their distribution and building up their brand, those are likely paying off now, too.
all the pieces are fitting together. Now, looking at their profitability, the report doesn't go into detail about their net profit in this initial overview, but we'll get a better idea when we look at those increasing dividends.
Yeah, those are a pretty strong hint that they're doing all right on the bottom line. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about their balance sheet. One thing that caught my eye was the increase in their trade payables and bills payable. What do you make of that?
So they're basically taking a bit longer to pay their suppliers, right? Could be a way to manage their short-term cash flow, especially when they're investing so much in growth.
That's one possibility. It could also just be a reflection of them buying more stuff overall because their sales have increased. It's worth looking at the details to see what's really going on there.
Their turnover days for payables also went up a little, from 33.3 days to 33.8 days. Not a huge change, but worth noting.
Yeah, it's something to keep an eye on. If that number keeps creeping up, it could be a sign they're having trouble managing their cash. But for now, it doesn't seem like a red flag.
Their capital to liability ratio also improved slightly. You mentioned earlier that this was linked to their increased financing for accounts receivable. So basically, they're borrowing money against the money that's owed to them.
Exactly. It's a way to get cash in hand faster instead of waiting for customers to pay them. It can be a good way to boost their liquidity in the short term and gives them more flexibility to invest in growth or manage other expenses.
Smart move. They also emphasize their prudent treasury policy, which focuses on maintaining good liquidity. This means they're making sure they have enough cash on hand to cover their short-term obligations and keep things running smoothly. Makes sense.
Yeah, no business wants to be caught short of cash, especially when they're trying to grow. And speaking of growth, they mentioned some pretty significant capital commitments for building new production plants and buying equipment.
That's a good sign, right? It shows they're confident about future demand and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is.
Absolutely. Those capital expenditures, those are real, tangible investments. They're putting their money where their future is. And now, for the part everyone's been waiting for, the shareholder value. Dividends, dividends, dividends.
Yeah, time to talk about how they're rewarding those who have invested in them. And it's a pretty good story, at least when it comes to dividends. They've been steadily increasing their payouts.
For sure. They paid out 0.45 RMB per share for their 2021 final dividend. Then they bumped it up to 0.68 RMB per share for the 2022 final dividend. And now they're proposing a further increase to 0.75 RMB per share for the 2023 final dividend.
Not bad. Shows they're making money and they're willing to share it with their investors. And we're not talking small change here. These dividends are adding up to billions of RMB.
Exactly. It's a good sign for shareholders who are looking for a steady income stream from their investments. Now, what about share buybacks? Did they do any of those in 2023?
Actually, no. According to the report, there were no share buybacks by the company or its subsidiaries in 2023. So they're focusing on dividends for now, but that doesn't mean they won't consider buybacks in the future.
Right. Buybacks can be a good way to boost share price and return value to shareholders, but they're not always the right move. It really depends on a lot of factors like their cash situation, market conditions, and their overall strategy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from their different businesses to their financials and how they treat their shareholders. Now, let's try to step back and get a bigger picture view. What's your overall assessment of Nongfu Spring moving forward?
Well, one thing that really stands out for me is their commitment to sustainability. They're not just paying lip service to it, they're really weaving it into their operations and their long-term strategy.
Yeah, they've got a whole sustainability framework with oversight at the board level. They're talking about everything from water conservation and recyclable packaging to employee well-being and responsible sourcing.
It's impressive. And they're not just setting goals, they're actually making progress. They've already achieved significant reductions in their water usage, and they're on track to hit their target of 100% recyclable plastic packaging by 2025.
It's definitely something consumers are paying attention to these days. It's not just about the product anymore, it's about the values behind the brand. And on that note, their governance structures seem pretty solid too. They've got strong anti-corruption policies, active board committees for audit, nominations, and remuneration. It gives you a certain level of confidence as an investor.
Totally agree. Transparency and accountability are crucial. And they're clearly investing in their people, product quality, and building a sustainable supply chain. All those things add up to a positive overall assessment.
Right. So taking everything into account, their strong financial performance in 2023, their focus on sustainability, their solid operational practices, it seems like they're in a pretty good position for continued growth.
Yeah, I'd say so. Of course, there are always challenges, especially in a dynamic market like China. The regulatory landscape is constantly evolving, consumer preferences are changing, and who knows what the global economy will throw at them.
Right. There are always things to be mindful of. But based on what we've seen in their 2023 annual report, I'd say Nongfu Spring is navigating these waters pretty well, pun intended. They're definitely a company to watch.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of Nongfu Spring. They're more than just a bottle of water, that's for sure.
That's the goal, to go beyond the headlines and really get a sense of what's happening inside a company. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to leave you with something to think about. We've talked about their focus on water quality, their sustainability efforts. But here's the thing, what happens when those two things start to clash?
Ooh, good question. You mean like with the growing concerns about climate change and resource scarcity?
Exactly. Water is becoming increasingly precious. Plastic pollution is a huge problem. How will these global trends impact Nongfu Spring's long-term strategy?
Hmm, that's a tough one. It's a real balancing act, right? They're going to have to find ways to keep growing their business while also being responsible stewards of the environment.
It's a challenge for every company, but especially for one that relies so heavily on natural resources like water. I guess what I'm saying is, next time you see one of their iconic green bottles, think about the bigger picture. It's more than just a drink. It's a window into some of the most pressing issues of our time.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Hopefully it's given you some food for thought. Until next time.
Take care.